Video is brought to you by Painting and Drawing Association. Meetings on Thursday.
When I'm making a pedestal, I don't really ever measure. You don't have to lay out a pedestal at all, as long as you have a plan. I mean, you can lay it out if you want to have a plan, but I don't need a line across the material to know where my saw goes, because the fence does that for me. So this fence, in theory, is perfectly parallel to the saw blade. So any cuts I make are going to be accurate and repeatable. Repeatable is the key word here. Okay. What I'm going to do today is make a square pedestal, so even on both sides and taller than it is long. Okay. It's going to be like a 2 foot tall by 1 foot wide pedestal. If you're making that's the easiest way to make a pedestal. Like I said, the easiest way to make would be to make a cube. But I'm going to make it a longer pedestal so you can see what it looks like. The key to doing that is to understand that two opposing sides have to be perfectly the same size, have to be exactly the same size to each other. Okay? So with that in mind, I'm going to move the table saw fence as little as possible. So any cuts that I can make that I can repeat, I'm going to do as I work. And so that requires a little bit of forethought and planning. Okay? Another thing to note is that it's an interesting facet of table saws that it's very safe to cut things that are long, but it's not safe to cut things that are wider than they are long. Okay? So this is a slightly more dangerous situation. It's not that bad because this is also a pretty wide board, so it's not that bad. But you don't ever want to, say, cut a board that's way longer than it is wide, because the tendency of it to get caught by the blade is really high, and that was what causes kickback. You guys know that this saw is very safe with regard to like getting your hands in the blade, because the blade is stopped by the brake and it goes away, but it still is susceptible to kickback. So that's the thing you have to guard against, is the kickback. Okay. Now,
a very powerful machine too. It's 5 horsepower saw.
Yeah, this is a 5 horsepower. My saw back home was like maybe a 1/3 horsepower. You know.
1/3.
Yeah. I mean, and it's fine. It actually works well because it has it's 3-phase, so it makes the torque a little higher. But this is like a saw that will not stop.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, that'll fling that whole piece of MDF and hit the back wall.
Yes, it will. Me before it. I'm going to miter all the edges of this so that all that you see when the thing is glued up is the face of the MDF. It's not going to be butt joint, so you don't ever see an edge of MDF, which is ideal for painting scenario. Even if you get it super clean and close and super tight, butt jointed edge will show paint differently than a mitered edge. So for that reason, I do all my pedestals this way. So what I need to do basically is I need to make 4 sides that are mitered together. The top of those sides are also mitered because they will accept a mitered top. Okay, so that top will be mitered as well to sit down in the top. And if you do it properly, if you make all the cuts at the same time, it's gonna just magically go together. It's pretty amazing actually how it works. Okay, the first cut I need to make, because I know that my top is going to be mitered, I'm going to make one long cut at a 45-degree angle that I will then slice parts of off, and that way my top's already done by the time I go to miter all the other edges. Okay. Handy little thing we have here at this shop is this Wixley miter gauge. This little thing. So if you turn this on, it's got a magnet. You stick it to the bench, and then you hit the 0 button. It zeroes out. So that's the 0 degree angle. Might not I've zeroed out. Okay, I'll zero it out, and then if I put it on the blade, it will show where the blade is sitting. And so when I angle this blade, turn this blade to the side, it will tell me exactly when I'm at 45 degrees.
Yeah, I never trust the indicator on the front of the saw because it gets bumped around all the time, gets moved. I always use the Wixie for finding my angles.
Okay. The other thing to note is that when you put this on the blade, these teeth stick out farther than the blade does. So you need to put it, that's why I raised the blade all the way up, so I could put it on the flat part of the blade. Because if you don't, your angle will be off.
Throws it off about a half a degree.
Yeah. So, handy, right? Wonderful. Now I'm going to lower my blade back down so I don't have, you don't ever want to have that much blade sticking out. It's a good idea to go, especially a miter they can have a tendency to burn a little bit. MDF cuts really easily, so you don't have to worry too much about it, but in general, I like to keep the gullets kind of exposed so they cool themselves off when they're coming up through the wood, and it helps to keep from burning your material. Now, I'm simply going to set the fence now to, I won't be able to get an entire 2 feet of this because what I need to be able to do is cut off the edge of this so it's at a 45 degree. So I can just eyeball that. Unless you're doing unless you're like matching a board, to matching a pedestal to another pedestal or something, you don't really have to worry too much about exact measurements. Again, the saw is repeatable, and you should change the fence as little as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this first miter, okay? Then I'm going to cut the board into several pieces to then miter all those edges. So an important thing to notice how easy that cut. I mean, that's just like butter. It barely made noise. So MDF is really good. If you've got material that's warped, it's not a good idea to use it because for accuracy, I need that material to sit dead flat on the table so that if it's raised up a little bit, you can imagine that miter wavering down the thing. Okay, so now I've got that. Now, ideally, you wouldn't even need to change the blade to move the blade. But because I'm out of consideration for safety, I'm going to cut this into almost the size of its component parts before I make the actual final cut. But yeah, the actual final miter, because I want to give myself the safety advantage of using. So if I were doing this another way, if I had to save material, if I had to again exactly match another one, I would cut this a little differently, and I wouldn't have cut this first. But for you guys today, usually you're going to be building one-off pedestals, so that's how I want. Okay, so now I'm going to just cut this basically in half, and then in half again, and then we'll cut all of the component parts out of that set of pieces. Okay. To do this, I'm going to raise the blade back up to perfectly level.
Are you trying to get 4 pieces or 5 out of this?
Yeah, I need to get 5 out of this. So it's going to be really narrow. They're going to be 5 really narrow pieces. It's going to be kind of tall and skinny pedestal. You can, usually the stop is exactly 90 degrees, but because sawdust can build up on that stop, it can sometimes throw it off. So if the saw hasn't been recently cleaned, you might want to just check it to make sure, because you might have to go a little past the stop, kind of squeeze the stop a little bit to get it perfectly. It's not that important to me because I'm not making a final cut here. I just needed to cut it down. Okay. I was on the clock, so.
I'm a shop assistant.
Is that?
I said I'm a shop assistant, so I assist the shop.
So usually you can count MDF to be, when it comes from the factory, to have a square edge, so you don't really have to square things up like with a miter sled or anything. Just assume that this is 90 degrees and it can be a reference surface. As well, this is surprisingly right at 48 degrees, 48 inches, which is odd because, you know, MDF is usually
1 inch over.
Yeah.
They sell MDF at 49 by 97 for some reason.
I'm going to make a 7-inch pedestal. To do that, I'm going to set my saw. Instead of at 7 inches, I'm going to just set it at, to make these initial cuts, I'm going to set it at 7.5 inches. Oh, sorry, I'm going to set it at let's see, 23 inches to cut it down. This again is just, I'm just cutting it into smaller and smaller pieces so it's as safe as possible. This big of a piece is great. If I were to cut like this, you can imagine that easy to screw up things. It's important that you really watch the fence when you're cutting the table saw, okay? That's really where the action is going to happen, especially on this kind of saw. You want to make sure that that fence is tight. Notice the other thing I did, once this piece released from the piece here, I let it go and I continue pushing this through until it's past the blade. That's an imperative thing as well that you want to make sure to do because it can, that can fit back. Now I'm going to set it to my, that I've got this manageable piece, I'm going to set it to my, and cut the slices off that I want. Okay, so I'm setting it to 7.5 inches. I'm just going to cut the slices off. I got 4, I'm going to cut 1 extra on top. Now here comes the fun part. This is where it all just like comes together and makes the pedestal without you really even trying. Okay? You got all your component parts here. I'm going to go back to making my blade 45 degrees. Slow down when you get close to the 45 degrees. Okay.
Yeah, that too.
Okay. So now what I need to do is set up the saw. And I'm going to look down the blade because I want to set the saw so that it barely cuts off that corner. Okay. This is just to maximize my material.
Problem is the distance on the tape measure for the fence is from the bottom of the blade, not to the top of the blade.
Yes. So what that effectively means is that it's showing 7 inches here, but it's actually not cutting 7 inches. It's cutting more like 7.5.
Yeah, 7.5. I think it's usually the thickness of the material, and there is a way to mathematically figure it out, you know.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do now, this is going to be great, because all I got to do is run all these boards through this way and this way to put a miter on it. It's awesome. It's like magic. Notice I need to keep pressure down so that the material is flat against the table. As well, I want to make sure that I never see the miter if I'm cutting it the wrong way. I'm putting downward pressure and kind of letting my hands skirt along the edge so that I have a consistent. Then, this is the operation that's a little more dangerous, but you can make it safer by cutting it down a little bit, but I'm going to just do it like this because I know this is soft, so I know how to use it. My top. The other thing MDF is really good at is that it accepts glue really well, and it glues up really well. So I'm not even going to use any mechanical fasteners for this, and it'll be fine. Make sure everything's facing the right way. All the top miters are at the top, and I'm going to simply just line them all up together. You want to get this part as tight as possible so that the top is clear. Since the top is really what's important here, like I've got a little gap here, so my pedestal is going to have a little bit of a curve. The reason that happened is because I wasn't as tight to the fence as I could have been, so it cut a gradual curve, but it's going to work out fine. And especially in a large pedestal, it would all be eliminated. I'm going to line them all up. Packing tape is pretty indispensable to a woodworker making boxes or things like this because it will serve as my clamps, and it's also pretty magic the way it works.
Does it mess up the surface of it?
Doesn't. It doesn't stretch much. You can use, you could use any other kind of tape, but this doesn't stretch at all. Other
Masking tape
tapes
will stretch.
What's that now?
Masking tape will stretch.
Masking tape stretch. I mean, this stretches a little bit, but it's not like critical. And I'm just going to lay it on gently at first, and then I'll tighten it up as we go. Okay. So you get it to fit as tight. You might also get any dust off of the board before you just help it to stick. Like I said, this will be your clamp. You don't need to clamp it any further. If it were a large pedestal and I was a little concerned about the glue surface, I would add glue blocks on the inside and clamp those, but I don't need to clamp the board. Now, watch this. This is going to blow you away. It just rolls up. And when I put glue in there, it'll be really tight, and then I'll show you what to do at the top. With MDF, it's a good idea to spread the glue out and then put another layer of glue. Yeah. It's It's really not lotion. Don't use it as such. You want to put glue on both surfaces. I'm just doing this side and then I'll come back and do the other side. You don't have to use a whole ton of glue, but it is general practice to use enough glue that you get some squeeze out. In this case, the squeeze out will all happen on the inside, so it won't really matter. But there's no reason for you to go really super overboard with glue. I'm spreading the glue out just evenly. If it's a really hot day, a really humid day, you might need to add 2 coats of glue because the first glue that you put down and spread out, by the time you get to the end, might have dried a little bit. I like to use a glue in my own shop that has a longer open time, which allows me more time when gluing up things. Because glue up is by far the most nerve-wracking part of any woodworking operation. That's where everything gets screwed up. If you've made a mistake at that stage, it's really hard to. If you've made a mistake at that stage, it's really hard to correct it. Very best to keep the glue from the outside of the MDF because MDF is not it doesn't clean up quite as well as other materials. Okay. Stand it up. Thank you, Jim. It is best to have a wet rag with you to clean up any excess glue that might come out of the MDF. Now I will take again my masking tape and just provide a little bit of clamping pressure on the outside here, this last corner. If you're really concerned about it, after I get this top on, we can wrap some tape around and kind of pull it really taut, and that gives it some more clamping pressure. Now all I have to do is apply glue to the 4 sides of my top. Strap clamps will work too. He's talking about just ratchet clamps. They actually make them specifically for miters as well, but they're just basically like strap clamps you'd use to strap stuff down with. It's really cool. Sometimes you need to put clamping blocks because those straps can bend the wood, and you got to be careful because it can apply a lot more pressure than you imagine. In addition to this, you can put tape across the top.
So perfect.
It makes it so perfect. It's really amazing. Why anyone does butt joints, it just is beyond me when you see how easy it is to do it this way. You'll end up with some sharp corners that you'll want to sand slightly to get the sharpness away. And it can also kind of be...
Careful when you're cutting MDF too. It can get so sharp if you slide your hand down the miter, it'll cut you.
It will cut you, yeah.
If you drop the board, it slides through your hand.
The plug. You can take the clamps, the tape off in about an hour. And then you want to just kind of sand lightly and clean up any glue squeeze out that's come. See, there's a little bit of glue squeeze out that's come through the corner there. It's not really going to affect you, and your paint is going to be a lot thicker when you roll the paint on. It's going to be a lot thicker than than any squeeze out. But just sand it away and make it easy. This will paint exactly the same everywhere. You will not see any difference in the paint. It will just look like a white, clean box. It's really pretty great. I'm going to put a piece of tape on this so I can turn it upside down. You can go around and put the tape on all the way around if you're worried about it, but this will be really tight. Okay. to make this thing into a shelf. Say we wanted to make this kind of weird shelf that was like long against the wall and stuck out really far. Okay, you simply have to make a box, just like you did. So you alter the size of your box depending on how you want the shelf to be. If you want it to be narrower, obviously, or wider or shorter. You know, just alter the dimensions how you see fit. Come over here, everybody, to this side. You can see the inside. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a decent measurement of this, and I'm just going to go cut a piece of MDF and make it a cleat that will fit inside this. Now, cleating is one way to do a shelf, especially if you're not gonna have a whole lot of weight on the shelf. A cleat will be fine. If this is what it's called, a French cleat, and we'll just use a piece of the wood that we have left over from making our demo. Now, there's another way that I'll show you that involves a piece of like 2x4 wood that is actually also a cleat, but the way it works is it just slides in like a piston fit sort of cleat that you bolt to the wall first. You drill 2 pilot holes and you screw it into the cleat. That makes it quite a bit more secure cleat. So if you had something, say, heavy on the end of this, you know, it won't pull off the wall because it's bolted as well at the top. And what most gallerists do is they'll have the pilot holes and they'll screw it in, and then they'll cover that with like caulk or putty, and then paint the pedestal up with the wall. And that way it's hidden, but you know exactly where the screws are. And then you can dig out the putty and unscrew it when you go to take it off the wall. Okay. A cleat is easier, and it is permanent, and it will usually hold a lot of weight. The only problem with a cleat is that if you get too much pressure on one end, the physics of the way a cleat works, the cleat wants to suck the piece to the wall and down, right? If it's pulling from this direction, it's counter to the way the French cleat works. I'll show you why in a second. Turn my blade back up 9 degrees. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make 2 cleats, one for the wall and one for the piece. So I'm going to make it out of this wood that's already cut at a 45-degree angle. Now what I have here are two pieces of cleat that will work together. One cleat will fit inside the box like this with the leading edge facing out. What I'm going to do is just going to mark it, and I'll cut it very precisely. Okay, so I'm going to make that cut so that it fits, piston fit inside there, and I'm going to glue it in. This one you will need to clamp or put screws in, but in MDF a glue joint will be just as strong as screws, so if you clamp it, it'll be really tight. Okay, so if I cut it and put it in there, what I'll then have is a mating cleat that's screwed to the wall. I want to make it slightly narrower than this other cleat, so I have some room to move it slightly on the wall. Okay. For this, I'm going to use the miter saw because it will be quite a bit more precise to get I need it to be a really square edge. So I use the miter saw. You never want to use the miter saw and the fence together at the same time. You always want to use the sled separate from the fence. Okay. And the reason has to do with forces that will the physics of a table saw will cause it to have some kickback as well. And cut it slightly large, a little bit large, and I'll test it. I'm glad I cut it large because that fits perfectly. Okay, so I'll glue that in just like that. Notice that the leading edge of the cleat is facing out. That's critical. If you had it this way, it wouldn't work very well. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll put glue on that, and then I will get a couple of clamps and just clamp it across its width, across here, and that will hold it really, once that glue dries, it'll be super secure. It'll be like the same board. You know, if you were to break it, it would probably not break at the glue joint, it would break somewhere else. Okay. Now, all I have to do now is cut a piece that's relatively about the same size, but just a little more. And this is so that I don't have to worry about finding the exact spot to fit on the wall. So now, this will bolt to the wall, and it will hold that up. Let me glue this, and I'll show you exactly what I mean. This is called a French cleat, and it's incredibly effective. It is also using that 45-degree micro. See how with the glue on it, it just goes in really super nice and tight. I cut it, ideally you cut it exactly the right size, but for me, because I measured slightly crooked, I cut it large first so that I could test out the fit. Measure twice, cut once is the rule. Now that isn't, you'll get better at it the more you use saws and more you understand how saws work, you know, the edges of saws. What I would do now is I would put a clamp across this just to make sure that glue joint is tight, okay. And I'll let it sit for 45 minutes, and I won't stress it for an entire 24 hours. So I'll wait till tomorrow and do it. Now, this piece remains free and loose, and this is what you screw it directly to the wall wherever you want your piece to be. And then it just sucks up in and it just stays put. Yeah, this is just a hanging shelf. This would be the way you'd make a hanging shelf. You wouldn't want to necessarily make a shelf this long, you know, unless it was a special installation you had, which you can, you know, you can do that, and you can shore it up so that it makes it, it is strong enough to work, but it's typically not done. The other option to hang a shelf on a wall, and this is what they use in the gallery here for their hanging shelves, and a lot of galleries do, is you would take a piece of 2x4 like this, 2x4 lumber, and you would cut it to fit, again, it'd just be a block inside that you would nail, that you'd screw to the wall. Okay, that block then, when you slide the shelf on it and it's sitting on top of this shelf, you know, it slides on. You would then put 2 screws in it, and that would also hold it tight to the wall. And then you putty over those screws, and you wouldn't be able to see it until it's time to pull the installation down, and the installer would know to dig out the screw heads and unscrew it.
So does people usually paint this white, or does it matter?
White.
White.
The color of the gallery is what is usually traditional, but there may be a reason for you to paint your pedestal a different color.
Okay, so maybe like after a day I can like sand it and paint it, or just paint and sand? I don't know.
You can sand it and paint it. You don't have to sand much. I would just take these sharp corners off slightly so that they don't, you know, sharper corners are more susceptible to damage, actually. So if you put a slight little, not even that you can see, little chamfer on it with just a block of sanding paper, it will prevent that the damage from happening so easily.
What, you said chamfered? What is that?
A chamfer is just like, you know, you put a bevel on a hard corner. That's what chamfer is.
Oh, okay. All right. And what kind of paint do you usually paint on top?
Wall paint.
Wall paint. Okay,
And
cool.
you don't have to prime it or anything. You can just paint the wall. You probably need a couple of coats, but traditionally what you do is you ask the gallery what kind of paint they use, or just use some of their paint and paint it with their paint so that it matches the walls perfectly. Because whites are all different, you know.
So usually for each show you kind of just make another one just to match the gallery?
I don't make another one. I'll like make a pedestal for a specific piece, and it travels with the piece, and then I just paint it based on what the gallery has,
Okay.
what kind of paint they're using.
And like, do you like reuse the same pedestal for different?
Yeah.
Oh,
You can use it until it gets beat up, and you know, just make another one when it does.
And then you just repaint it every time?
Repaint it every time.
Okay,
You
cool.
usually have to repaint because in the process of handling it, it gets dirty, and so you have to repaint it even if it's in the same place, you know.
All right.
And then when it starts getting dings and everything in it, then you throw it out, get a new one.
How long does your pedestals usually last for?
Oh, a long time. I mean, if you
Take
take
care
care
of
of it like your artwork, it would last, I mean, as long as it work.
Okay.
Genuinely, really.